On the pitch, your favorite football players seem perfect. This might be good for the fans. However, these footballers you adore so much are just humans like you. And guess what? They face the same problems regular people face. They deal with alcoholism, drug overdose, and women problems, and sometimes they are overwhelmed. Some are able to handle things just fine, but others get ruined.
France. Two center backs being good tonight for Haiti. Oh no, look out! What a mistake! Can you believe that happened?
These are the 30 greatest football players whose lives were ruined by alcohol, gambling, and their wives. We can't wait to get started, but we need you to kindly click the share and like buttons first. Also, hit the bell button to see more videos like this. George Best. You perhaps remember George Best for his glorious days as a Red Devil. But beyond all he achieved in the Manchester United jersey, the Irish player struggled with alcoholism. And while the football world expected him to score great goals and weave through defenses very swiftly for a long time, his reign was not as long. Was he injured? No, he wasn't. Rather, he made headlines for his love of alcohol, and this put off his light a little earlier than expected. Tony Adams. Tony Adams was not as popular as George Best in his playing days, but the former Arsenal player is considered a legend by Arsenal fans. Unlike Best, who was about beating players, Adams was about keeping the ball from getting into the net. Adams' challenges on the pitch might have been different from Best's. However, off the pitch, they dealt with the same challenges. Like Best, Adams had issues with alcohol and even sometimes played games under the influence of a drink or two. Paul Gascoigne. If you think Tony struggled, then maybe you have no idea what struggles Paul Gascoigne dealt with. Well, just like Adams, Gascoigne struggled with alcohol, but his life would have been just fine if all he had to deal with was alcohol. The former English international had troubles with alcohol and gambling, and these obviously stopped him from reaching his full potential.
Gascoigne, he can finish it here! Gascoigne! 2-0!
Kenny Sampson. Speaking of English footballers struggling with alcohol and gambling addiction, Kenny Sampson, who had more than 80 caps for the English national team, was one player that seemed overwhelmed. Struggling with alcoholism and gambling were bad for Sampson. However, even worse is the fact that the former celebrated player became homeless and found himself on the wrong side of the law. It perhaps never gets worse than this for a player. Manuel Francesco dos Santos. If you think English players are the only ones that seem to struggle with gambling and alcohol, you are wrong. Brazilians have similar struggles, if not worse, and one Brazilian that struggled with alcohol is Manuel Francesco. The man who was a representation of samba football is considered to never have reached his full potential, and this can only be tied to his alcohol addiction. Well, Gara didn't just have an unfulfilling career, also, he died at the relatively young age of 49. Paul Merson. Away from Brazil for a moment and back to Europe. Paul Merson was perhaps not considered as talented as Garrincha. Nonetheless, he played a key role in the success of Arsenal Football Club. He was a part of their golden generation. However, he was more than just a great player, he was a gambler and an alcoholic, and this strained him financially. In the end, his struggles got bigger than his achievements on the pitch. Ricardo Quaresma. Portuguese winger Ricardo Quaresma went from being compared to CR7 to going into relative obscurity. How it happened might be difficult to explain. But the Portuguese player who was a beauty to watch on the pitch was a different person off the pitch. He had lots of personal trouble and alcoholism was one of them. Well, some people might handle their personal issues well. Unfortunately, Ricardo does not have such ability. So in the end, he simply had to get out of the spotlight much earlier than anyone expected. Jimmy Greaves. This generation of football fans might think of Holland and CR7 when they think of prolific goal scorers.
Have to beat the defender. He's got the goalkeeper now.
This is great, but at some point, Jimmy Greaves was seen as one of the most prolific scorers in planet football. Well, like some other players with immense talent, Greaves got involved in the wrong activities and alcoholism was one of them. In the end, he had to go to rehab. Ronaldinho. It might not be a problem if you didn't know the other players in this video. However, you are not a proper football fan if you have no idea who Ronaldinho is. The man that is considered by many to be the last true samba player went bankrupt after his playing days. But even while still an active player, clubbing and drinking made it difficult for him to remain at the top for a long time. Mickey Thomas. If you know nothing about the woes of addiction, then maybe you know nothing about Mickey Thomas. He is perhaps the perfect example of a fall from grace. The Welshman was a force on the pitch. However, away from the pitch, he had an unstoppable love for gambling. With the growth of this habit came an increase in his debt and financial woes. It was only a matter of time before his exploits as a player were forgotten. Keith Gillespie. During his time as a footballer, Keith went one-on-one with several opponents, and he was able to get past a lot of them because of his pace. Well, his opponents were not just on the pitch. Off the pitch, he also dealt with gambling. Unlike the opponents he faced on the pitch, it seemed like he did not have the means to deal with gambling. In the end, he found himself in a financial mess no one saw coming. Chris Waddle. Chris Waddle had a reputation for not following the norm. On the pitch, this seemed okay. However, this lifestyle got him into some trouble. Chris made some choices that did not do him any good, and one of them was how he spent time off the pitch. Stan Bowles. Bowles enjoyed playing football, and this was evident to everyone that saw him play. But apart from football, something else had his attention. The Englishman had a major love for gambling. This perhaps did not affect his performance on the pitch, but it got him into major debt. Dietmar Hamann. Speaking of players having an unexplainable love for gambling, Dietmar of Liverpool and Germany was key to the success enjoyed by his team on a club and national level. He seemed very calm, and it would be impossible to think he could be interested in a vice like gambling. Well, the German midfielder loved gambling, and this was bad for his finances. Lee Hendrie. Not everyone can handle success, and if you have always wanted to know one person that clearly couldn't deal with success, look no further. Lee Hendrie is one. The former Premier League star made bad decision after bad decision just because he got wealthy one time. In the end, he was a shadow of himself. Robin Friday. Robin was legendary both on and off the pitch. He might have been loved for his skills on the pitch, however, you just couldn't love him because of his lifestyle. The man was indisciplined and seemed to have a partnership with alcohol. In the end, his career was short-lived. Jermaine Pennant. Pennant went from being considered one of the most promising English footballers to really strolling into obscurity. He had the chance to play in top clubs like Liverpool and Arsenal, but he chose to spend time gambling, and his career suffered for this. Ian Redford. Pennant might have clearly made the wrong choices, but not every struggling player made the wrong choices intentionally, and one of them is Redford. The Scottish midfielder died untimely and faced a lot of trouble off the pitch. He ended up giving in to alcohol, but this did not make things any better. He only got worse until he fizzled out. The next set of players really lost it after going through a divorce. But before we check them out, please subscribe to this channel if you are new here. Mark Bosnich. Mark is not one of the biggest names in football, but you might know him if you follow the EPL, as he played for Chelsea and Manchester United. Well, in 2013, he declared bankruptcy after divorcing his wife. This divorce repeatedly gulped £1 million. Titus Bramble. Speaking of players that lost £1 million after divorce, Titus Bramble was declared bankrupt in 2014 after his marriage to his wife ended. John Arne Riise. Going from winning the Champions League in 2005 to being broke is not something lots of people can understand, but Riise perhaps knows very well what this feels like. The former Liverpool star had a decent life as a pro. He made some bad money moves, but the straw that broke the camel's back was his divorce from his wife. He became bankrupt after this separation. Chris Sutton. John Riise reportedly lost £100,000 during his divorce. This might be big, but it is nothing compared to the £6 million Sutton lost after his marriage ended. He was declared bankrupt as far back as 2009. Eric Jemba Jemba. Eric did not have a reputation for being financially smart. However, things got even worse after his divorce in 2016. He faced financial hard times after losing £1 million in this divorce. Warren Barton. Eric and Warren do not have a lot in common. However, they both lost £1 million to divorce. Warren was declared bankrupt in 2013 after his divorce. Colin Hendrie. 3 years before Warren was declared bankrupt, Hendrie had already filed for bankruptcy. This happened after his divorce, and he reportedly had to part with £2 million. David James. Famous as one of England's best shortstoppers of all time, David James might not be living the life after retirement. Well, he has no one to blame. His present financial difficulty is a blend of wrong financial decisions and a divorce that cost him £3 million. Emmanuel Eboué. This video would be incomplete without Eboué in the mix. The former Arsenal player went from playing in the UCL to being homeless and moving around by bus. Of course, he made some bad choices, but his divorce was the blow that knocked him out. Asamoah Gyan. Speaking of African stars that went from abounding to abasing, Asamoah Gyan reportedly had less than £650 as of his divorce. Of course, after this divorce, he had next to nothing. Fortunately, some of his properties were in his brother's name, so he did not lose it all. Adriano. When Adriano came on the scene, it felt like he was a replacement for R9. He was good and lived up to expectations, but he did not have the capacity to handle the loss of a loved one, and he depended on alcohol to make him feel good. He probably felt good for a while, but in the end, his career took a nosedive. Diego Maradona. Unarguably the best football player of his generation and arguably the best of all time, Maradona had it all. But he perhaps gave it all away because of his love for drugs. He got the highs and the lows and perhaps lived life to the fullest. However, for what he achieved on the pitch, he perhaps lost because of his lifestyle off the pitch. So, which of these players do you think took the biggest fall? Kindly tell us in the comment section below. See you in the next video.